Good evening and welcome to everyone who's joining us for this conversation between Israeli-American composer Chaya Czernowin, who's our composer in residence at Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival this year in November, and BBC Radio 3's Robert Worby. My name's Graham Mackenzie. I'm the Artistic Director of Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival. And thank you all for joining us this evening. This tonight is a live event for hcmf members. And I imagine that most of you know who I am and are wondering why I'm introducing myself. But we will be recording this event, and it will be available to a wider public on our YouTube channel from Tuesday next week, Tuesday the 14th. And that will be available all the way through until the festival and during the festival in November. You have the possibility tonight to ask questions, pose questions, using the Q&A facility at the bottom of your screen. And Robert will be keeping an eye on that and posing some of the questions to Chaya throughout the talk. We also, across our social media channels, asked people to send in questions so that those who are joining next week for the recording, we may have been able to include some of those questions tonight, so that you might hear your question being asked as well. I am extremely grateful to first of all, Chaya, actually, because Chaya would have been composer in residence in 2020. And of course, world events have taken over since then. And I'm so grateful to Chaya for allowing us to roll over her residency to hcmf 2021. And I'm very pleased you're joining us tonight from the States. And as always, I'm grateful to our regular Huddersfield correspondent, Robert Worby, who's done many of these interviews for me, and I always enjoy them because it means that I can sit back and listen intently, which is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to switch my camera off, switch my microphone off, and I'm going to leave Robert and Chaya to have what I'm sure will be a very beautiful and worthwhile conversation. Thank you both. Thanks again, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, and welcome everybody, and welcome Chaya, our composer in residence for 2021. We hope we will see you in Huddersfield in November. I'm sure that will come to pass. And thank you for agreeing to join in this interview this evening. It's probably fair to say that your work is not extensively known in the United Kingdom. You have an international reputation in Europe and in America and elsewhere. But the purpose of this interview will be to present your work to the Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival audience. And I'm sure that if anybody can bring your work to the United Kingdom, it's Graham Mackenzie and the Huddersfield Festival. So just a bit of background, Chaya, to begin. So who were your teachers that were most important to you? And why were they important? And what did you learn from them?
Great question to begin with, and I wonder how much time do we have? So I would like to mention, I guess I will mention 5 names, and I will try to be brief, but I really feel like I have a debt, very strong debt to all these people. My first and in a way last teacher was Abel Ehrlich in Israel in the Music Academy. Abel Ehrlich came from Germany and was a very crazy human being with a wild sense of humor and very free way of thinking. He did not mince words, and if he didn't like something, he said it, sometimes very aggressively. And this gave you, as a student, because he did not treat you pedagogically. He treated you like a colleague. And then you had to deal with his opinion. And one could learn a lot from him because of the openness. There were no categories, there were no preconceived notion of what something needs to be. He was really always thinking on the go. My second teacher, Itzhak Sadai, both are not with us anymore, was exactly the opposite, also in Tel Aviv, and he asked me about every small detail in my work. I had to give reasons, I had to give groundings for every dynamic play, a dynamic mark, every duration, etc. I learned a lot from that experience. I learned about consistency, consequence. That was the other side of the pendulum. And then the pendulum swung back with Dieter Schnebel in Berlin, who is also not with us, sadly. Again, a free thinker, an amazing human being with a great, a great horizon. Both Ehrlich and Dieter Schnebel were not only composers or music people. Their thoughts had wings, and they always actually were not in the mainstream of what was happening, more in the fringes. I have enjoyed that very much, and I've learned a lot from the freedom that they gave me. And then I came to UCSD, University of California, San Diego, where I met Brian Fernihau, who has become a very important, the British composer, who has become a very important teacher, not because I studied with him directly, actually studied with him directly only 2 months, and then we had a whole year dealing with string quartets, not mine and not his. But his music and his approach, I think, really revolutionized my thinking and were very meaningful for me. And my dissertation mentor, Roger Reynolds, was again a person of order, of consistency, of clarity, but also a person who knows how to absolutely appreciate the power of intuition and of the flight of the fast soul. I think this is the fastest.
Yes, those are the 5 composers who you feel kind of underpin your compositional thinking, your musical thinking. So did the idea of becoming a composer evolve slowly, or was there some kind of epiphany? Or did you always know that you were going to be a composer?
I always knew that I'm in music, that music is my home. There was never a question about that I think started in the age of 3, when my father would teach me the second voices to all the Russian songs that they sang. And I was able to hold to my own while everybody sang the first voice. I think that the notion of myself as a composer started to develop in the age of 13, 14, when I was a teenager. And whenever I needed to express something, it came as music. It could come also as words, but actually the music was a very natural and very satisfying way to react. So it was not an epiphany. It was very gradual, but very, you couldn't stop it. Yeah, very absolute.
So when you began to think of yourself as a composer and when you began to compose, what were your musical concerns back then when you first began? What were you concerned with musically?
Oh, I started as a rock and roll musician. I don't know. I wrote some piano songs, and Actually, that's not true. My first song was very modal and very strange harmony. But then I started writing songs, and it was all about, I don't remember, it was all about expression, all about expressing something. And when I got to the age of 14, the concern became slightly different. And I will just give a word about it because I think it was meaningful. As a teenager, and at the age of 14, I was not a happy traveler. And music became a place where I felt was my shelter city, so to say. So I could, when I connected to music, that was my place to actually express all the crazy and very dark thoughts that I had. And I think that it was very meaningful because it established a very direct and not encumbered line between my own deepest emotionality it started to create a riverbed to an expression that could flow freely.
So you've explained a little bit there about how things changed. It's interesting that you began as a rock and roll musician because you're of that generation where the kind of popular music has run parallel with music from the classical tradition and other traditions. Before the 1950s, there were no teenagers. They didn't exist. People just were children, then they became adults. And with the invention of the teenager, when the teenager had money to spend on fashion and on records and on music and that kind of mass consumption thing, a whole new generation of musicians and composers came into existence. So is it possible briefly to say what your concerns are now? And, or to put it another way, what is it that you think you're trying to do?
I don't think exactly I'm trying to do. I think that rather the way that I view it is as following. My makeup, my character, my possibilities allow me to contribute, however small contribution, to the flow of music in a way that only I can do it. You know, it's very individual. And what I am trying to do is make the flow, the possibility of this contribution feasible, so that the pipe through which that contribution is coming through are very clean, so that it can come and flow in the best way possible. And if you ask me what this contribution, what this small, minor contribution is about, I would say probably that it is connected to, if I am pretty fearless and I'm not afraid of going deeper and deeper and deeper in the onion layers of somebody's or of our own archaeology, topology, however physical, emotional, biological it is. So I have a very strong drive to discover and to explore, and this is what my contribution is about. But my concern is with getting my ego, getting my wishes, everything out, so that I'm able to approach this in the best, not in the best, in the right way, in the, I don't know how to call it, in the cleaner way. That sounds too puristic, in a way that it flows.
You're a prolific composer. You write a lot of music. When I look at your list of works, there are many pieces written last year during the pandemic, a lot of material. where do ideas for pieces come from? Does one piece follow on from another? The new piece being a kind of extension of the previous piece? Or do you wake in the middle of the night with a brand new idea that you write down? Do you have a sketchbook that's full of ideas? Do pieces come from commissions? I suppose they do, but commissions bring restrictions because you are required to write for these forces. So where do ideas come from for you?
I really love how you asked this, because I would say all of the above. So when I was never a fast writer until about, I think 5 years ago or so. I've written in a very constant rhythm, which was, so, and I calculated it, 2 minutes of music every month. That, however, changed drastically in the last years. And right now I'm writing quantities which are hard for me to believe, but they come, and I follow them, I do my best. In the past, and when I started, it was just as you said, you know, one piece came from what was missing in the piece before it. So I would very critically observe what I've done, and I would say, okay, that was not just right. So the next piece starts at that point. Right now, the process is very, very different. I know about what I'm going to write until many, many years from now. I mean, I know what I'm going to write until the year of 2008. And so I have in my stomach, I always think, for some reason, I have like this, it's not a cabinet, it's a live garden where there are seeds of every of those pieces. And some of them even have names, or some of them have a feeling or a color or a sound, or each of them has something. And the more I get close to them, I can open and look into those seeds and figure out what they are. But they are already growing. And I feel that it's not bouts of inspirations. It's not something that sudden. I feel that the day is full of bouts of inspiration. So when I'm interested in something, let's say I'm thinking about a certain flow or a certain way in which right now I want to have a process which comes almost violently and flows suddenly, like a whale that comes out of the water. We didn't see the whale before, and suddenly there was a kind of a shadow, and then huge thing comes out. It was there, but we are becoming of its size when it comes out. That kind of, when I'm thinking about that, I suddenly see a lot of things that help me to figure out what is the physicality of this, how can I do that, and that comes from nature, that comes from people talking, it comes from everywhere. So it's just the antenna is always open.
That's very interesting. I notice you use the word flow a lot. You talk about
I noticed
flow.
too.
You talk about flow in different contexts. So we might come back to that later on. And you mentioned just now inspiration, and I'm always fascinated by the idea of inspiration. And I wondered what it is for you. What is inspiration, if it exists at all? Well, you seem to think it does. But there are some composers with whom I've spoken who say, I haven't got time for that. I've got to get on with the work. You know, I don't have time sitting around for waiting for inspiration. So what is it for you, and how does it work? What does it make you do? Where do you get input from? You know, the impact, this flow, again, if you like, that you use this word flow, this stuff that flows in. How does it make you, what impact does it have on the music? That's the question I'm trying to ask, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm not I'm not a romantic creator in the sense that I would not wait for inspiration. I do not believe in that either. In that sense, I am actually echoing your other composers who say I have no time for it. It's not about waiting for something from the outside to come in. It is about creating the instrument by which you are expressing things and working on it in such a way and exercising it in such a way that it is really sitting healthy. Sitting healthy means that it continues and compels you towards your right development as an artist, that it continues to grow, that you are not stagnant, that if you are stagnant, it's as a part of a growing process, larger growing process. And that way of listening to everything which is around, that way of listening to where your creativity needs and should and wants to go, that is a kind of exercising your antenna, leaving the window open. So, you know, sometimes, for example, to just sharpen this, sometimes the music that I write maybe is not the music that I love the most. And maybe I would say to myself, oh God, do I have to do that? Why do I have to go there? But sometimes I do. I have to go to a certain direction. It's not about me. It really isn't about me. It is about my other self, which is that garden builder. And that garden builder is going behind the garden that she is creating. She is not establishing the list of the trees, and she is not deciding of what the garden will be. She is constantly running behind, and the garden is giving her direction. That flow, again, the word, between the direction, receiving the direction from the garden and being able to follow, even if it's not completely comfortable, that is what I call the health of the creative personality. And that is what I'm working on.
But are you the garden designer? Do you decide which plants and trees go in the garden?
No.
You don't. So, but
No.
are you the person looking after the plants and trees? Are you watering them and feeding them and making sure there are no weeds and plants that you don't want in the garden, making sure the plants that are there survive?
It's about the relationship between material to form.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's say that in the garden there is a new thing that I have nothing about, that I know nothing about, but it seems to be interesting, or it is there. I will have to follow that thing. I'm not going to take it away because I actually wanted to deal with another tree in the back. So that the garden's growth is, it's not completely improvisational. It has its own logic, but it's not a logic that I can figure out ahead of time or control. Usually that logic becomes very, very clear when you look backwards. It's like actually very parallel to how we grow as human beings. Do you really control who you are going to be at the age of 30, 40, 50? You do what you do. Those things you do, those things you create, those things that lead you, make your personality to what it is. It's not completely in your control. Very, very parallel.
Can I ask you about technique? I wonder what technique is. I wonder if you consider that you have a particular technique or techniques that you have developed for composing. And I wonder if there is a difference between, say, technique and craft.
Can you just elaborate a bit more about the technique and craft point?
Okay, so composers have particular kinds of craft, so methods, if you like. So maybe that's another, maybe method is yet a third thing. So in order to compose, you need to have ways of doing it. So you write it out on a piece of paper and you lay it out in a particular kind of way, and you make the relationships between the signs and symbols on the page and the sounds that are going to happen. And that changes over time, I would imagine. And this is craftsmanship. It kind of evolves and develops. A bit like the gardener, your techniques for looking after the plants get better and better and better. Maybe, or maybe they don't. Some things go wrong, and the plants are not doing well. But you must have some kind of method for doing this. You know, maybe you have a way of watering the plants in a particular order, or maybe you feed them with particular kinds of fertilizers or nutrients that they need. So I suppose in a way I'm asking you, how do you do it? This idea of technique, how do you consider that you have a technique that is your own, that is unique, that you have devised, or have you observed techniques from other composers going way back, maybe way back to pre-medieval times? I don't know. You know, there are many ways. There are many ways of writing music. There are many ways of composing. I wonder if you have any self-awareness, self-consciousness about processes that you have devised and developed and nurtured.
Absolutely. But I would like to start from something that you said, and I found very interesting. You said, maybe you water the garden, you do something, but something goes wrong and it stops working. So I would like to start here and say, what does that mean? It means that the technique, the craft, the ways, your habits got you stuck. They are not responding to the new needs of your compositional personality, to your artistic needs. And in that sense, I would like to say that my means and my techniques are first and foremost to be analytical. So, you know, I've had a funny, just a small anecdote, a funny interview with somebody, with Nicolas Darren, something like this. I'm so sorry that I'm flaking of his family name, in IRCAM. And he asked me about my way of doing things. And he said that it's so strange that when he asks me, I know everything about what I've been doing. And when he asked somebody like George Benjamin, George told him, I have no idea what I'm doing. Whereas if you hear my music and his music, you would assume maybe the opposite, that he knows and I have no idea. So awareness and analysis are my greatest instruments. That means that if I have an ingrained habit, I sometimes have to fight very hard not to use it.
Yep.
This is my technique. My technique is not mini polyphony or 12-tone technique. I have nothing like that. My technique is exercising the connection between a vision, an idea, a very, maybe taken from totally different area, taste, or something I see. Figuring out, why do I like it? What is so interesting in that thing? And how can I take the most important characteristic and make them into musical parameters? That is a very transparent technique. it's not connected to building blocks that I can call. Nevertheless, let me be also a little bit more realistic and say that for me, you will have to look very hard to find pieces that I wrote which don't have glissando, which don't have merging and unmerging of instruments that become unified and ununified. I'm always problematizing the general premise. So I believe that if I write a piece very well, the piece is not going to agree with, many times the piece is not going to agree with what I thought about it in the beginning, and it will let me know in the middle of it or more in the golden section how to proceed. So there are a lot of ways in which this thing is exercised. It's all about, these are techniques of exploration.
We've had a couple of questions come in, which is very good. But I'd just like to ask you one more question.
Please.
And then we'll go to some questions. Actually, there are now 5 questions have come in. 6 questions have come in. So obviously our conversation is, hopefully our conversation is stimulating some interest. But just before we go to some of these questions, I don't know whether we'll have time for all of them. I want to ask you about what I perceive in your music as a focus on the physicality of the sound, on the sonority. I hear this all the time. Where does this focus come from, do you think? And how did you develop this fascination?
You know, the sound is true. The sound doesn't lie. The sound doesn't have ideas, ideology. The sound is present. The sound is present. How do I make the sound present?
In the physical space, in the psychological space, in the emotional space, in the intellectual space, all of these things, I presume.
All those things. I want to penetrate your skin as a listener. I want to get underneath it. How can I create a sound that actually invites that kind of engagement? It's actually the opposite of the aggressivity in which I said it. Maybe it's the smallest hint that will trigger that kind of under the skin suggestion, so that everybody can adjust it to their own skin, so to say.
And I wonder about this physicality. Sound is very, very complicated. A single sound is a very complex thing. And your music is notated. So notating something that's extremely complex is quite a tenuous process. When we look at the music of Bach, he didn't, in many pieces, he didn't even put in dynamics. We just had the rhythm and the pitch, and that gave us some idea of what the dynamics should be. But I wonder what impacts this fascination with the physicality of sound has on notation. So for example, a piece like Air or a piece like Hidden that we're going to hear at Huddersfield, what I wonder in pieces like that, where the sound is intensely physical, what is the purpose, for example, in a score, in pieces like that, what's the purpose of pulse and meter and tempo? Because pulse and tempo are connected. So I can't remember who described pulse as dividing time into savage chunks, we get these chunks, and we can make it flexible with changes of tempo, and we can make it flexible with changes of meter and all of those kind of things. So this fascination with physicality of sound has an impact on the notation, and of course the notation has an impact on what we hear. Can you say a little bit about that, about the connection between the physicality and the notation?
Yeah, I think that my relationship to notation has also changed a lot. And I'm a great believer in traditional notation. I think that this is something that grew organically, and that it houses so many possibilities of music. I'm really quite in awe and quite in a lot of gratitude that we have that notation system. Let's just say in what you mentioned, matter of time. Why do I notate sometimes in 4/4, where my music will never sound like 4/4? I notate in 4/4, but it does not sound as 4/4, but the framing inside 4/4 allows me to communicate with the musician in a very unmitigated way. I know that what I want, I know that what I'm demanding is far beyond the normal. I'm really asking for a lot. And my way of going the extra mile is talking in a conventional way in the notation and making it so that the intuition of the player can be called to help and decipher what I want, and not the opposite. So I know that the curve of that players have with my music is that in the beginning they are very much taken aback, but after 3-4 days, it suddenly works intuitively very much as a helping tool to understand the intentions. And that is done because I never am counterintuitive about my notation. I take the things from the tradition and I ride on them and I add to them and I continue to develop them, but I do not rebel. I use the tradition in order to serve something that at the end aim might be exactly the opposite of what, the 4/4 is helping to create a very complicated rhythmical grid which serves my need through the ways in which the player is used to work.
And could you say something about your work with electronics? Again, this is the physicality of sound and your connections with Earcam. Just briefly, some questions have come in, and I think these questions, looking at them quickly, I think we'll put them towards the end of our conversation, because the questions are about lots of different things. They don't follow through a kind of thread, and we're in a thread here. So we're talking about physicality of sound, notation, and I'd like to ask you about your work with electronics, because there's a lot of pieces that use electronics in many different ways. We're going to hear Hidden, for example, in Huddersfield Town Hall. I think it's on the Sunday of the festival. This was composed in 2013. It's for string quartet. We're going to hear the Ardittis. Who else? Fantastic. And you present the electronics in what you call 4 walls: front, rear, left, right. So that's one example of your use of electronics. What draws you into electronics? There is a question actually from Aaron Holloway-Naum about sound projection, the way that you particularly using electronics, you can quickly move sound in space, much faster than you can move sound in space with acoustic orchestral instruments. So sound projection, electronics enable spatialization, transformation of timbre, transformation of time in all kinds of ways. How do you connect electronics with conventional orchestral instruments and with this physicality, this notion of the physicality of sound?
I never write for conventional instruments. I mean, I write for instruments, but I try to begin with to approach them in a way that the basic premise already puts them on their toes or subverts them or does something. Oh, my phone now. Just a second. It will stop in a moment.
Turn off their phones when we're in the concert hall.
It's always in canon because there are a few phones that are doing. Anyway, yeah. So I would like to say that the electronics serve in many directions. First of all, they can be a zoom in. I can, for example, if I have a microphone near a singer's mouth, I can project over the whole a whisper, a breathing, a sigh, even if a whole orchestra is playing. Because if I have speakers all over the hall and I have the singer amplified from all speakers while the orchestra is in the back, I will feel like the voice of the speaker is touching my head from everywhere. Electronic has a lot to do with touch. It can really zoom in to understand how the small hairs of something are touching, the ear. You can really hear that in a way through the electronic. That's on the one hand, and then it is very immersive from the other end. So that the whole becomes a universe and something that, as Aaron implied, something that is in your front suddenly is in your back and you are not oriented. That kind of disorientation in space, which is such an important seventh sense that we have, is really can be really exercised and discovered and rediscovered in very interesting ways through the electronics. And all of this is connected to touch, to energy, to gesture, which are all issues that I deal with. So it's not something additional. It is the same type of inquiry, but just with technological means that enable much more closeness, much more detail.
Kaya, I'd like to put some questions now that have come in from people participating in this event. And some of the questions do relate to some of the issues that we have discussed. So now seems to be a good time to maybe bring in some of these questions. And Ollie is asking, somebody called Ollie is asking this question. He says, I'm wondering how you think of your recent compositions as relating to one another. Your sound worlds seem to change a lot around 2010. At the time of Hidden, that's 2013, but I'm wondering if there's something that you noticed yourself, this change in your sound world that Ollie seems to have perceived.
Absolutely. It's not only the sound world, it's first and foremost the temporality. I have realized in 2008 that I'm very fast. I'm a very fast thinker. I don't say that only as I don't say it as a bragging. It's also a problem. I think in a lot of direction really fast and I'm very impatient. And so my music was never a place where somebody can allow things to develop on their own accord. They would just always create those hives or those conglomerations of movement in the auditory space that one could not actually follow. And after hearing the program of 3 hours of my music, I got really frustrated and I told myself, okay, we are done with that. That sentence repeated a few times during my artistic life and it always brought fruit. So it's not, first and foremost, it is the slowing down, absolute slowing down. If you think that slowing down would make things simpler, you are wrong. It makes things much more complicated, because when you slow down, you actually notice that there is much more complexity than you have initially thought there is in the slow down stream. It's true also, Oliver, that my sound landscape has changed a lot. It has softened and it has become, I feel, of another type of sensuality. That's what I can say for now. I think it's enough.
Okay, that's good. We have a question here about fast darkness, and I was going to ask you about fast darkness because we're going to hear it. The Riot Ensemble are going to perform it in St. Paul's Hall. They're going to perform Fast Darkness 1. There is Fast Darkness 1, Fast Darkness 2, both composed, I think, in 2020 during the pandemic. You have this extended title, Fast Darkness 1, I Can See Your Turned Eyes from Inside Your Body. A fascinating title. We've talked a little bit about titles, but to what does this title refer? What is this title about?
It's such an uncomfortable title, which is where I wanted to put the piece on. That's where the piece had to start to emerge, in that place where you are not sure if you are in your own body or somebody else, when you are, you have something which is not controlled. And, there are those very weird moments of the body where the body is doing something which really makes you question your whole environment, your whole support system. I mean, now physical, organic. Something is moved and you don't know what's going on. It takes only a sliver of a second until you come back to normalcy. But if you have Alzheimer's, for example, those moments can be huge, and they can affect not only your physicality, but your whole mentality. I'm talking though about in a normal person, that kind of slight moment where you are unsure about what's your border and what's the border between your mechanisms to everything which is outside. That's how I wanted the piece to start, in order to give myself a kind of a push to go into that vital, cringy, strange comfortability.
The question that I have here on my screen from a person who remains anonymous says, I really loved your description of fast darkness, and you're comparing it to the short feeling of falling when you thought there was a stair in your next step, but there was none. The question is, something so intangible into music?
Yeah, these are, when you talked about techniques, these are the problems that I put for myself. Because those problems are unsolvable, in an absolute way, but they are vehicles to discovery. They give you, it's like they give you a sea which is huge, and your fishing stick has a lot of space to roam, so that you can actually throw it and get very far away. That's how I choose the missions that I would like to give my creative side, as a kind of a push to discover.
And another question has come in about hidden, which we have briefly discussed. But again, this person who is remaining anonymous writes here that you've said that in hidden, it's a piece of music which time doesn't move. And this person is really interested in what the experience of actively writing music like this is. How do you approach writing music where time stops?
It's not a pointillistic thing that I can tell you I approach it ABC. It started when I was 25 years old, 29 years old. And I told myself, never again. I'm tired of myself creating the pieces with high point and resolution. And then I went for 10 years and inquired, what does it mean to put something in the beginning of a piece, in the middle, in the end? This was an inquiry that really took 10 years. And then I was inquiring, what does it mean to create a process which doesn't only go horizontally, A+1, A+2, A+3, until we get to a B, bad example, but I think people will understand. But maybe a process that goes up, a process that goes down, a process, all kinds of processes. So to approach something where time stops, and all this in one voice or in polyphony or in multi-polyphonies, there is a whole maybe methodology that I could detail. If at any point I will get very tired of writing music and have a lot of things. It's not a, it's a huge, so in hidden though, I reached a stage at that place where I could, in a way, stay in a long time in one place and not intervene. But if somebody hears the piece, I do intervene around a bit after the half of the piece. I intervene in a very big way. And I've thought about that a lot. Is this the failure of the piece? Is this the merit of the piece? And I do think it is the merit of the piece. I said that in another interview, that this is where the piece gets into trouble. And that trouble, just like John Lewis in the American politics have said, this is good trouble. I'm sorry, it's much more egoistic than the way that he said it, but still, it's for the greater good. Also, in some modest way, I believe.
We're coming towards the end of the time we have available, but there's just a couple of more questions that we could take here that have come in.
I will try to be very succinct.
We're succinct. Yes, I think that's we need to be now. Mick Peake is asking, this question goes back right to the beginning in a way. We're in a kind of sonata form situation, perhaps. Mick is asking, what live music were you able to listen to in your formative years in Israel? He's particularly wondering about your exposure to the modernist composers, Darmstadt, etc., at that time. And he's wondering about the extent to which the music of that period is of any relevance to you now.
There was very little in Israel when I was growing up. And when I was in the academy, I was 19, 20, etc. But there was a series in the Israeli Museum in Tel Aviv, which brought pieces by the curator was John Frank Williams. She brought pieces by Lachenmann. She brought pieces by Kagel. It was really European avant-garde at the time. And she brought Schnabel. I think that it was really important to listen to, but I can tell you I was much more influenced by Chelsea, by Feldman, by Ferneyhough, and I was extremely influenced by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, John McLaughlin. They were, this is when I was teenager, and I really listened to those things endlessly.
And here is a final question from Sophie, who put this question some time ago, but it seems an appropriate question to end this conversation. She is asking very simply, what advice would you give to emerging composers about embracing non-classical or even non-musical influences in their work?
the advice would be
embrace. That seems to be a good place to finish our conversation, Chaya. Thank you so much. Thank you so much indeed. I hope that we see you in Huddersfield in November. In my view, the most important contemporary music festival in the world, but I'm a little bit biased maybe. So thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who has sent in questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to answer them all. But if you're in Huddersfield in November, Chaya hopefully will be in Huddersfield, and we can carry on the conversation then. So thank you very much, Chaya. And
thank you so much, Robert. It was a lovely and extremely interesting presentation of questions. I'm very grateful to you, and thanks everybody who took part. And thank you, Graham, for the invitation.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
My thanks to you both for a very fascinating conversation. As always, there's not enough time. I could listen to you both talking for many more minutes and hours, actually. But let's hope that everything goes well, and Chaya, you join us in Huddersfield in November, and then we can have part 2 of the conversation, which I look forward to enormously. So thank you very much, both of you. Thanks to everyone who joined us this evening, and I look forward to seeing everybody later in the year. Thank you so much.